Okay. Thank you all for taking a break from playoff hockey. This is a big ask. I don't know if there's games tonight. You didn't know. He's out. Yeah. Yes. Okay. So we're here tonight in the third installment in our series of great Jewish books and thinkers. And like I said in my little teaser between Mincha and Marv, this is tonight with this week marking Wednesday night and Thursday, Yom HaShoah. There's no other Jewish thinker in all of Jewish history that I think their message and their life story is as important to remember, commemorate by way of learning together than the Piaseczno Rebbe, Rav Kalonymus Kalman Shapira. What he did for the Jewish people, how he lived for the Jewish people, is nothing short nothing short of astounding. And what he left us with in front of me, I just grabbed these off of my bookshelf when I was preparing my thoughts. This is all his works that he wrote. And what I want tonight to be is, when we met the first time about a month ago, and we spoke about was it the Barbanel, the first one? I told you that we're going to speak mostly about the individual, and less about the book. And then we spoke about, does anyone remember what the second one was? Levi, very good. You guys passed. So I mentioned that we're going to focus more on the books and less on the person. And this one, with the Piaseczno Rebbe, is really going to be a hybrid of both, because what was so unique about his life, thank you, is he really, his works that he wrote, that he authored, really speak to the stage of life that he was in, and it's extremely expressive of the time that the Jewish people were going through. So I really want to try to understand almost the Piaseczno Rebbe in a split screen.
How do you say his name?
Rav Kalonymus Kalman Shapira was his name. Piaseczno was a town about 10-15 kilometers, a small shtetl, a smaller town out of Warsaw. So during 1939, when the Nazis took over the Warsaw and eventually built it to the Warsaw Ghetto, so there was this ironic piece of history that the Jews from the smaller towns on the outside felt it would be safer in the big city. And for those that made that decision, it was wrong. It was a horrible decision to make. But the Jews from Piaseczno and others all converged to Warsaw, which did half of the Nazis' job for them, because all they had to do was build a wall around the city, and they captured, so to speak, several thousand Jews, because there was the core population of Warsaw and all the small cities like Piaseczno. But the truth is, he really could have been referred to as the Warsaw Rebbe. Even before the war, as we'll note right now, he was extremely well known. Okay, I'm not going to restart, don't worry. But what I was saying is, he really could have been known as the Rebbe of Warsaw, because he really was. He was the most venerated scholar and spiritual leader in even the large town Warsaw. But out of his own humility, he wanted to be known as the Piaseczno Rebbe. It's like it was a smaller little position, so he pushed away the title of the larger leader. Yes.
His book's the Wellsprings of Torah. Is that his book?
No.
No.
Wellsprings? No. I'm trying to figure out what you're thinking of. But
Torah.
Oh, maybe. Little pamphlets, did you see? No?
It's a two-volume book, I think.
Bring it in, I'd like to see it, but...
For his bar mitzvah.
Uh-huh.
And it has a lot of things, goes through all the parshiyot.
Uh-huh.
And it's wonderful. When
It's
I have to do
a
it for
great
Torah,
Right.
I go to it.
Yeah, no, this wouldn't be... His only sefer that he wrote about the different parshios, which is known as the Aish Kodesh, it wouldn't be your go-to to say an uplifting Dvar Torah. It's a dark work. But we'll talk about that when we get there. But before the war, what did this really iconic and incredible life look like? His grandfather was first of all, I want to mention that Cheryl Bender is related to the Piaseczno Rebbe somehow. How?
Her grandfather.
Yeah.
Paternal grandfather was his second cousin.
Okay.
Wow.
Unbelievable. Yeah. Basically, the Piaseczno Rebbe was Amil's grandfather, basically. Right? But in all seriousness, the grandfather of Rav Kalonymus Kalman Shapira was Rav Kalonymus Kalman Epstein, who was one of the main students of the Chose of Lublin, and without doing a deep dive into kind of the general Hasidic background, all you have to say is he was a student of the Chose of Lublin. Like, the Chose of Lublin was like one of the Hasidic masters, and Rav Kalonymus Kalman Epstein wrote one of the great Hasidic works called the Ma'or Vashemesh. So this was the grandfather, Rav Kalonymus Kalman Shapira's grandfather. He was named after his own grandfather. And on his wife's side, she came directly from the lineage of the Kuznets Hasidim. Like, they were Hasidic royalty, for sure. Okay? That's what they were. So he got married to this, I think it was a granddaughter or something like that of the Piaseczno Rebbe. And they had one son and one daughter together. And as we'll review when we get into the darker periods of his life, none of his family survived the war. I'm sorry, I'm not on the right page over here. Okay. So he was born in 1889, and before the war, he was, as I mentioned, very famous. Mainly his fame came from advice he gave to people, but his main fame was he was the Rosh Yeshiva. He was the head of probably one of the most prominent yeshivas that existed in Poland between the wars. It was his yeshiva. It was called Das Moshe. There was around 300 students in the yeshiva, starting from ages 12 and up, so like high school type of thing. It obviously isn't split up the way we have it now, but pre-bar mitzvah through early adulthood. And it said that the exam to get into the yeshiva, there's different versions, 50 daf, 50 pages of Gemara, or 100 pages of Gemara, word for word off by heart.
Wow.
Okay? The amount of people in today's world that have access to that level of Talmudic genius, I don't want to say you can count them on one hand, but you could probably count them on like 3 people's hands and toes. Like, globally, who could stand up today? Like, I know one person, Rav Asher Weiss, like he could rattle off, most of Shas, word for word. But he has photographic memory. Like, not all these children had photographic memory. There's like, to understand what that means, you have a yeshiva of 300 students, and let's go the more conservative approach, right? 50 daf off by heart. It's mind-boggling. It really is mind-boggling that such a thing existed in the 1920s and early 1930s. It really is mind-boggling, and it's a sign of one of the elements that was killed by the Nazis, because yeshivas rebuilt and Torah scholarship flourished. There's more Torah learned today than ever before in history in quantity. The quality doesn't exist like it used to. It's just very different. It's unheard of that unless some kid is a super genius, was gifted from his genes, like an absolute photographic memory, to have a collection of young men of this age. Not only did he have this very, very esteemed yeshiva, but he also got more of a wider spread name, so to speak, put him on the map because of the publication in, I believe it was 1932, of this work right here, called the Chovas HaTalmidim, the obligation of a student. It's incredible because we didn't know this until later in history, as we'll develop a little bit soon, but this was the first volume of a multi-volume work that he put out. This was a guide for how to be a 12-year-old, okay? The obligations of a student. Now, later, we'll only find it after he was killed, murdered by the Nazis, and I'll explain the astounding story of how we got these works, but let's just go ahead in the future a little bit. This next volume in this multi-volume work is called Hachsharas HaAvreichim, and the third volume is Mevo HaSha'arim. Hachsharas HaAvreichim is like how to be an 18-year-old, okay? And Mevo HaSha'arim is like how to be a 25, 30-year-old, just as adulthood is blossoming into place. So these 3 are really meant as like, here you go, happy pre-bar mitzvah, happy get married soon, and happy, start raising family and developing your real midos. This is really, it was an entire structure presented to the people, students of his yeshiva and beyond, because the students would leave his yeshiva, get older and older. So he would, so to speak, keep in touch with their spiritual growth. And it was basically a guide for people to the road towards spiritual maturation or spiritual maturity. It really is a brilliant work. It's still today this is in reference to Chovas HaTalmidim, for a 12-year-old, it's still today studied all over the world by adults. It's no longer seen as like exclusively for 12-year-olds. I don't think there's a 12-year-old in the world right now that can handle what he expects of a 12-year-old. It's like, it's beyond. I mean, just a few themes in the book and maybe just a couple highlights, to me at least. I mean, my copy is underlined everywhere. I've been through it a handful of times. It's a very inspiring, very motivating. The first thing he tells, the introduction is really an essay to teachers and to parents. He talks a lot about chanoch lenar al pi darko, that understanding that each child needs to be parented or raised differently. It's also interesting to note that he himself lost his father when he was 3. So he basically didn't grow up with a father figure. So there's a theme of like his students are his children. There's a theme of focusing, every child needs to focus on your obligations towards like Avinu Shebashamayim, our Father in heaven. And there's a sense that he was doing that because you have to teach a child that you always have a father, whether the relationship is good or positive, whether it exists at all. Like in his life, it didn't exist, but he built that father figure through himself with the students, and also in a spiritual sense with Hashem, with God. The first thing that he basically develops towards the students in Chovas HaTalmidim is it's really beautiful. He basically says, don't think, Ben Yakir, my beloved, my precious child, after tefached lomar, maybe you're afraid when you see your teachers in yeshiva or your parents that you think that they're trying to rob you of your childhood and make you into a Jew instead, right? But he says no, that you're still na'ar rach v'tov, you're still a young boy, girl, ohev l'shovev ma'at ohev l'sachik im ha'na'arim, you like to play ball, you like to play outside, v'inu banu elecha la'asoscha b'pa'am achas li'ish zaken, you think that maybe we're trying to make you into an old man with a beard, you got to dress up like old people, yoshev v'domem l'rachik mincha b'es kol yalduscha, you think that we're trying to speed up your maturity so you'll be more like us, the adults, to sit and learn and spend time with spirituality and don't speak extra words. And he says, oh, dai lecha b'chol zeh, you got time for that. Just like calm down, be a kid. Because ta'ita gam ta'ita, you're making a big mistake if you think that's what I or we as like the adult parents and teachers of the generation want from you. Don't be afraid of Yiddishkeit. Yiddishkeit wants you to take your childhood and develop it slowly but surely into ultimately what we believe God wants from us, right? So he's very, another thing which he does almost chapter by chapter is there's a theme in the book that there's no such thing as a bad trait. If you see something negative about yourself, it's not something you have to tuck under the carpet or delete from your inner self, but rather it's something that needs to be honed. It needs to be channeled towards something good. One of many examples he gives is what he calls like akshanas, which is to be argumentative or to be stubborn. And you might think he talks to the child himself, Bini Akir. You might think that you're so argumentative, no one likes playing with you, no one likes spending time with you. You should know the trait you have of being argumentative is unbelievable. You need it for leadership. You need it to be courageous. When people question what you're doing, you have to argue back, and you need that. But you have to learn how to channel it. So he really speaks to children in a way that there's no such thing as an internal bad element of you, but there's just, you have to be self-aware, learn about yourself as you get older, and channel and hone in all those parts of you. One just line, which I always go back to, I love so much. My books, my Sfarim, if I see a line that I really love, in the front cover I just write it and the page number, so it's easy to find, right? So there's an incredible line that he has over here, which is like this. I remember when I was a young boy, I was 13 or 14 at the time. I think we probably all have stories when we confronted a very small but rude anti-Semitic remark growing up, right? So I remember I was in a pharmacy in Ottawa, and my mother was in another place in the pharmacy. Like the aisles are so tall. My mother's 4'11". So I was like looking around. I was looking at my own things, whatever, and I was picking something out, and some immature man, in my memory, would recall him being maybe in his 50s, I don't know, came up to me and said, oh, a Jewish boy probably knows could you show me where they are? And he asked for something which was relatively inappropriate to ask a 14-year-old boy I'll let your imaginations figure out what he was asking for. Okay? Oh, a Jewish boy, you probably know where they're at. So I looked at him. I don't know what came of me, but I looked at him and I said to him, oh, I always thought that people naturally mature as they get older, but I guess I was wrong. That's what I told him. I don't know. My mother was very proud of me when I told her on the car home, but I said to the guy, and much later in life, in my 20s, I discovered this line in the Piaseczno. Ki rak hashanim mizdaknos velo ha'ish. Right? And it's within a paragraph. He says, Bachar Yisrael, young Jewish boy, Shema na'as haklal hazeh, please know this one thing. And it permeates everything in your inner self. Im lo tit'ametz v'tischazek b'chol kochecha l'rachek u'l'sharish mimcha kol midara u'shtos asher od b'cha miyalduscha. If as you mature, you don't actively try to develop yourself into being more patient, more giving, more kind, and all the good things that we want from ourselves and from our children, it won't happen automatically, right? You look and you say, oh, I'll get over this. I'll just grow up to be a great person. It ain't happening. You'll grow up to be an old person, but not a mature person. Kirak hashanim is darkness. Only years get old. Velo ha'ish. But the person doesn't mature by itself, right? So when I saw that line, I'm like, okay, I was mechaven to the Piaseczno Rebbe when I was 14 years old.
Can you read the beginning of the sentence?
This one?
Tishma, how did you say it?
I'll show it to you after, but Shema na et klal hazeh.
Shmana.
Shmana.
Shma is more than 2 years.
Yeah, please listen. Right.
Take it in.
Yeah.
Absorb it.
Yeah, you're right. There's translations of almost all his works, but he writes in such an emotionally saturated way. So hard. I read the English, I'm like, oh, come on. Like, it doesn't do it, but it's still, the ideas are there, but it's really, really hard to translate such an emotional work. Okay. So while he was still alive, he published the Chovas HaTalmidim, and at the same time, he published this tiny little work over here, which he says to never publish. He printed, I think it was 12 copies, and handed them out to his most elite students, Hasidim, grown men already. And he basically had this vision, part of his whole manifesto of, with all these different books guiding people at different age groups. And over here, he describes kind of the larger manifesto, which was basically to change Jewry in Poland. That's what his goal was. He writes in the introduction that the Jewish people have been overcome by externalities, and people are divisive because they forgot what the heart beats and the inner sense of what Judaism really is. Therefore, there's different trends that people identify with this and identify with this movement and that movement. People don't get along anymore. And he was on a life mission towards spreading, re-spreading the inner truth of Judaism, which connects us, which brings us unity, because those are things we all agree on. And his idea was basically, way before the Lubavitcher Rebbe thought of it, was to have shlichim, right? Groups of 4 or 5 young families to go out into boondocks all around Poland, little shtetl, and to adhere. It's basically he's creating these secret societies in every community that these people would agree to meet 3 times a week and be intensely critical on one another, practice these spiritual, meditative, and prayer practices with one another, and just being in those communities as an example of what real Yiddishkeit needs to look like, he felt would change. It never happened, but this is his manifesto where he explained to his chosen disciples what he expects of them and what this would look like when you go out to different far-flung small shtetl all around Poland. He has 5 conditions of what it takes to join the secret society of super Hasidim, spiritually infused Hasidim. I won't share with you all 5, but number 1, he says, is Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, stipulations of if you want to join, here's what you have to adhere to. He says, number 1, you need to be someone who's margish be'emet, bekirbo ke'ev v'da'avon, like a just distressing pain, al sharachaku me Hashem. You feel your spiritual distance to Hashem, to God, to spirituality, and that has to hurt you. He says, everyone knows that they're not perfect intellectually, but it's got to hurt you. He says, it's got to hit you so hard, ad sheyivke lepa'amim ad tzaras nafsha. Once in a while, you have to be brought to tears that you could be doing better in your Yiddishkeit. Okay? So, who wants to join? All our hands go down. Right? He says you have to feel it like a physical pain. He says, it can mean da'agos of hagufnias, chas v'shalom, like physical pain. It has to really, really really motivate you to do better. Like you have a problem in your health that you want to now do better spiritually. That's number one. Number two, he says, you've got to be someone who's non-judgmental of other people. He says, when you go to these little cities and people around you are going to be less spiritually elevated than you can't think less of them. You can't think, I'm more than you guys. You have to be someone who's to the contrary. Yisod chevratin, the whole essence of this whole group of people is avas Yisrael, avas chaverim, be'ofen hayoser chazak. Like a tremendous amount of ava, love that you have for every Jewish person. He gives an analogy, mashal is sreifa be'ir. Let's say there's a big fire in the city, and the firemen show up. So the firemen have these fancy hoses and fire trucks, and they're climbing windows, and you have these people who live in the town who are filling up buckets in their kitchen and throwing it on the fire. Everyone's doing their part. So the firemen aren't going to look at everyone else and saying, hey, we're better than you. No, everyone's doing their job. Okay, you might have a fire truck, you might have a hose, but everyone's working towards the same goal, and you have to appreciate everyone for their endeavors and really love every Jew. So this, he goes on to explain very specifically what these meditative processes are. He goes through one called hashkata, which he gets your mind to absolute silence and nothingness, like it's a real meditation, which has to do before davening or after davening, and this has to be done on a regular basis. But the main thing is that they meet 3 times a week. He says they should be balabatim, they should have a trade, a job, but they dedicate 3 evenings a week to each other, where they're incredibly critical of one another, open with one another, and always just trying to improve each other and themselves. That is, these are the only 2 works that he published in his lifetime, Chovas Tamidim, and what's called B'nai Machshava Tova. This has also been translated to English. It's actually a good translation. I think in English it's called A Conscious Mind, or something along those lines, right? Incredible work, really. Oh, and he said never to publish it. He says very private. This was something that a few, I think 3 of the 12 people that he gave it to survived the war, so they had a copy. And the Ger Rebbe said, when he saw it, he was so astounded by it, he said we should override what the author himself wrote, and we should publish it so people realize what the generation before the war was on a spiritual level, right? So this got published, not part of the incredible story that we'll share soon, how we have the other works, but this was actually, survivors had it in hand because they were personally given it by the Piaseczno, or they knew someone that was given it, and they had the manuscripts. Fine. That is that. Now we hit, like I told you, I wanted to try to understand 2 personalities, before the war and during the war. So now 1939 happens. All the Jews around converged to Warsaw, and things continued to get worse and worse for him and the Jews in Warsaw. And he continued. One of the main contribution and element that he's remembered for, he's actually known as the Aish Kodesh. That, like the name the Aish Kodesh actually took over the personality. Like we have like the Chafetz Chaim, because he wrote the Sefer Chafetz Chaim. So the Piaseczno Rebbe, Rav Kalonymus Kalman Shapira, is known as the Aish Kodesh, and that's this Sefer over here. And what it is basically a collection of his Shalosh Shudas drashas every week. Back then, the rabbi didn't give a drasha in the morning. It was just davening and a kiddush. You go home, you come back in the afternoon, and as Shabbos was ending, the Rebbe would give a drasha essentially. So these are a collection of his drashas from the years of 1939 to 1944 during the Nazi occupation of Warsaw. And what's incredible is, before we get to the material itself, the way we have, like I'm holding 2 books, but it's actually 4 Sfarim, because this is Hachsharas Havrechem, like I explained 2 of them already, and there's also something called Tzav V'Ziruz, which is his personal diary that he wrote for himself during the war, witnessing everything that was going on. So all of these 4 works in my hand in 2 volumes was collected. An incredible story. If you've heard of this in history before, but Emanuel Ringelblum, familiar with who he was, is a Polish historian who was stuck in Warsaw during this time, and he realized that what the Jewish people were experiencing was historic, of colossal proportions. What was happening, and you have to appreciate that it took him to realize it was so small, the steps that the Nazis were taking against the Jews, a lot of people, they say an analogy. Apparently, scientifically, it's not true. But if you take a frog and you put it on a stovetop or in boiling water, it jumps out. But if you put it in cold water and turn the fire on low, the frog doesn't recognize the small incremental changes and will just melt, right? So in many ways, the Jews of Warsaw didn't realize right away the magnitude of what was happening until it was too late. Not that they could have done anything earlier, but Emanuel Ringelblum, realized fairly early on that what they were collectively experiencing was something beyond what we could find in our history books. So he assembled collectors, what he called the Zomblers, to go around and collect every memorabilia from the Warsaw Ghetto. That's how we know about these gatherings that the Piaseczno Rebbe had. He writes in his books, in his memoirs, that around 300 people would come in Warsaw, in the ghetto. Even after the Nazis prohibited spiritual gathering, they would come and listen to the Rebbe, the Piaseczno Rebbe, in his Shalosh Drashas, which was collected in the Aish Kodesh. It was like oxygen for them. Like what they were experiencing was beyond anyone's ability to contextualize or comprehend. And he took everything that they were experiencing and spoke through the weekly parsha. And when this collection of Zomblers were called the Oneg Yom Tov group. And this Oneg Yom Tov group would have these collections of playbills of underground hospitals and medical training and what life was like in the ghetto for the Jews beyond what we could. But they collected everything they could, and when they realized that the Nazis were switching from the strategy of attrition, the wall with starving people with rations that historians say are about 150 calories per person per day, which is absurd. That's starvation, maybe more painful than starvation. People need at least 1,000, 1,500 calories to feel somewhat satiated. 150 calories per person. They were given these rations, and when they switched from that to deporting the Jews to death camps, so they realized that the Warsaw Ghetto was going to be destroyed. So they took all their documents that they had, and they put them in these milk tin cartons, metal tin cartons. They had 3 of them. By the way, these Zomblers didn't know who each other were. They were like different cells because they knew that one of them may have been caught, and they actually didn't want to know the identity of the others. So they could have literally been walking next to each other in the street, going to collect different artifacts, and not know who each other were. So 3 of them hid these 3 different tin milk canisters with all the documents that they had compiled. One of the Zomblers survived the war and remembered where he hid his. They went and got it right after they were able to. Unfortunately, the tin was damaged, and water came and everything was ruined. So we don't have any of those documents. A second one was discovered by accident by a Polish worker in 1950. A construction worker was cleaning out the rubble of a building that they were ultimately going to knock down and rebuild, and they were lifting up the wooden floorboards, and they found one. And in there, we had all of the missing 3 publications of the Aish Kodesh, of the Piaseczno Rebbe, Rav Kalonymus Kalman Shapira, were in that second milk carton. Okay, the original manuscripts never left Warsaw; they're still there, but they remained there for about 10 years, from 1950 to 1960. No one really appreciated what they were, and then some scholar realized it was there. It came from Israel to Warsaw, copied all of them, and published all of these works in 1960. The Aish Kodesh was published in 1960. When it came out, it was like baffling to people. People couldn't believe what they were seeing. And in the ensuing years, Mavor Sha'arim and Savaziros were published as well. By the way, the 3rd canister has still never been found. So who knows where it is, but it hasn't been found in the under rubbles of the Warsaw Ghetto. Yes?
I think they think it's under the Chinese embassy.
Really?
I don't know.
Was that within the wall?
I don't.
Okay.
I don't know why I'm saying this. Like there was a movie
Uh-huh.
that we saw. And
Okay, so we have to brush up on our Chinese before we go to Poland next.
I think that's,
Yeah.
I think that's like what.
Unbelievable. I haven't heard that.
Maybe I'm making this up.
Okay. Huh? Yeah, so incredible little piece of history. A lot of people, when they say the story of the Piaseczno, they say that he himself buried his manuscript. That's not true. He apparently was approached by one of the Oneg Yom Tov, one of the Zomblers, and said, this place is going to go down. we know that you've been writing. We know that you've been keeping notes from these magnificent Shalashudah's drushes you've been giving to the, over 300, not just Hasidim, non-affiliated, non-religious Jews would just come to hear this spiritual oxygen. He was a real spiritual, non-judgmental leader for anyone, and the strength that he was offered, by the way, by resistance leaders on the outside. He was like such an esteemed Rebbe. He was offered to be smuggled out, but he felt that his place was there with the Jews to guide them through these moments of incredible darkness, and ultimately he paid the ultimate price for that. Continuing a little bit about the Aish Kodesh itself. It's interesting to note that he himself didn't call the book Aish Kodesh. That phrase doesn't show up anywhere. The publishers in 1960 thought it was an appropriate name. He himself calls it the Torah Mishnas Haza'am, like Torah from the days of rage. And that's what he himself, or Torah from the years of wrath. In fact, the Henry Abramson, the great Jewish historian, so one of his books is titled Torah from the Years of Wrath, a historical context of the Aish Kodesh. And what Henry Abramson does, which he lives in the Five Towns, he's a professor at Torah College, and it's incredible what he did in his historical work. He goes through Polish documents, German documents, and understands the micro history week to week of what was happening in the Warsaw Ghetto, and he correlates ideas in the Aish Kodesh to what they were experiencing. Because one of the fascinating elements of the Aish Kodesh is if you didn't know the background and context, you would just think it was some Hasidic Rebbe who lived through hard times, which is, and he's writing a lot about theodicy, God's justice in the world, or why righteous people could suffer this much. But he never mentions the word Germans, never mentions Nazis, never mentions the word war. He never relates to things head on. He speaks through symbolism, he speaks through Torah, but he never actually tells you what happened that week, and therefore this is my message. And what Henry Abramson does is incredible, is he looks at what was happening, he looks at the piece that was, because we have every single piece is dated. We know what Parsha and what year. Look at the beginning of the work, Shnas Tafshin, 1939, Rosh Hashanah, Shabbos Shuvah, Chayisar told us. And every year we have, so we can understand the Gregorian dates and understand the historical documents of what was happening at that time. So he correlates them. We'll give you a couple examples, both to bring this point out, but also just internally to realize, before I looked into the works of Henry Abramson, I never understood it, I never really noticed this. But in 1939, he goes Rosh Hashanah, Shabbos Shuvah, and the next one is Chayisara.
Are the missing ones in the other canister?
No, not, well, maybe, but you'll see, at least for this example, what Henry Abramson discovered. So, Kaisar, and then it goes over, told us by Eitzah, like maybe he misses a week here and there, but that's a pretty big gap. Where's Bereshis? Where's Noah? Like, where's, where are those weeks? So he points out something very dark and very, very hard to even speak about. But he experienced many struggles, personal struggles, in the ghetto, in the Warsaw Ghetto. So when the Nazi bombing started in 1939, it was just before Sukkot. So again, think of our year. After Sukkot, you restart the Torah, Bereshis, so that's the time of year that we're in. And one of the bombs, the shrapnel, pierced through his window and hit his only son in the head, I believe, or in the chest. He had one son and one daughter. So he went to the hospital to try to treat his son. The hospital was so overwhelmed because there was bombs falling in Warsaw. There's a lot of victims of that terror. So he was running around trying to get the attention of a doctor to treat his son. At the same time, his daughter-in-law was outside. His own sister, the Rebbe, the father's sister, and the daughter-in-law, the wife of the son that was injured, was outside the hospital saying Tehillim. As they're saying Tehillim, another bomb hit right where they were, and they both died immediately. He never found a doctor properly to treat his son. He went home, and his son died 2 days later in his arms. Right. So very quickly, at the beginning of the ghetto experience in 1939, when it was all starting, he lost his son, his sister, and his daughter-in-law, just like that. With the and then it was Sukkot, right? So he didn't speak. Again, this is Henry Abramson, a little, conjecture, but it makes sense he didn't speak. What's the first drasha he gives on Chai Sarah? This is chilling. And I knew before I was reading Henry Abramson's works, this is one of the famous drashas, in the Aish Kodesh. But to think he had that break, and now he shares this Torah. Astounding. You read, there's a famous medrash, Chai Sarah is when Sarah Imenu dies. How did she die? So we know the Rashi, we know the medrash, that someone told her, an angel, she got the message about what Avram was doing to their only son Yitzchak. And that pain was too much, Parcha Nafsha, she died. He brings another medrash that she did that on purpose. She gave up her life out of protest about what was happening. Okay, these are symbolic, what that means. How could someone willingly have her neshama go up to Shemayim beyond us? But that's what the medrash says. So he says like this. He says, he brings the Gemara in Brachos, that pain is like salt. You put a good amount of salt on the food, on the basar, on the meat, and it's good, it makes the meat better. But if you oversalt it, the meat becomes ruined if you have too much salt. Right. Kach hayisurim. The same as with pain. Like you have to have it mixed internally in life that the person who's receiving the pain could receive the pain, and then it makes you better. Pain is good. No pain, no gain. Right? They used to scream in this tight leather pants. No pain, no gain. Right? That's good. It's true. Pain makes us grow in the physical world and the spiritual world. But he goes on to say, the pain of losing Yitzchak was too much. It was too much pain, and she was protesting against God. God, this is too much. And he says, all the more so us. So he comes back to the Shabbos table after what he personally went through. And I'm sure other people went around the table, went through similar things, give or take. And he basically said, Sarah once protested against God. This is too much pain for people to withstand. He found a biblical precedent for that argument in that week's parsha, and he said, Gam ken anachnu, kol shekain, all the more so us. Okay, there's another element that he uncovers, which is just when the strategy of attrition to deportation to death camps was starting. He has a note in an essay that he's talking about Hanukkah from 3 years prior. So he wrote it in 1939, and he has a note on the bottom in his manuscripts. He goes back and edits something. And when he's talking about Hanukkah, he's basically saying, there's horrible, there's horrible pain around us. But if you look in history, this is the pattern of the Jewish people. We're always treated badly, and the enemy is called Davar Dor Amar Aleinu L'Chalus. He doesn't quote that, but that's his message. And he speaks through the Hanukkah story, how it was really hard then as well. That's in 1939. And he has this note that he writes in 1943, just really shortly before he gave the manuscripts to be buried. He says, I could only write that Kishatzar Shahiu Ad Shalihi Shnas Tavshin Beis. Those were 1939, but I've seen a lot since then. And he goes on to explain that the tsaras now are mishunah. They are next level. You can't comprehend them. Umisos raos umishunos, horrible death that you can't explain. And he says, Lefi yediati b'divrei Chazal u'b'divrei Hayamim, according to my understanding and the entirety of Torah literature and Jewish history, Asher li Yisrael b'chlal, since the Jewish people were birthed, Mitzrayim included, Bavel included, everything, lo haisa kamosam. There's never been such a thing, right? V'Hashem yirachem aleinu v'yatzilenu miyadam keharaf ha'ayin. This has got to stop. So he writes a note to himself 3 years later that I was wrong. This is not part of the pattern of Jewish history. This is something completely different. So this also speaks to just what he experienced in his life and how I get Henry Abramson's work to correlate what was happening in his personal life and in the life of the Jews and see his message through the Aish Kodesh is incredible. So just one more thing to finish, which I forgot to mention before. I just wanted to show this visually, and then I have a treat for you. This is the cover page that was found on the manuscripts in that metal tin. the milk tin. And up here it says in Yiddish, but there's translations over here. It's basically attention with 3 exclamation marks. And he goes on to say, I don't know if Jews will survive in Europe. I see what's happening. I don't know if anyone's going to survive. He says, I have an uncle in Tel Aviv, and his name is, and he writes his name, Rabbi Yisrael something Shapiro. If you find this manuscript, please send it to my uncle, and he'll know. I really need the Aish Kodesh to be published. People need to know about these ideas that we've been sharing in the war. He goes on to say that whoever learns my Torah, in all generations, I will personally daven for, and I will advocate in Shemayim, and he gives like a bracha to anyone who learns from the Aish Kodesh. Then he has a letter to his uncle, asking him desperately to find his daughter, who he had lost in the war. We know, I'm not sure if he ever found out, but she was deported and killed in a death camp. So his son and his daughter, his sister, everyone was killed by the Nazis, Yimach Shemom. So he has these letters at the beginning, basically asking these, what was found in these canisters to be published. And it took, 15, 17 odd years, but it's incredible that we have, literally what I'm holding in my hand is a survivor of the Holocaust. The author wasn't, but his works were. Lastly, how long have I been okay, this is, I don't know, this means a lot to me. I used to listen to these a lot, I still do. But especially, since we kind of went through the legacy and the life of Rav Kalonymus Kalman Shapira, Rav Shlomo Carlebach used to share stories. He used to do these concerts, and speckled in between his songs were these incredibly inspiring stories where he would talk about the Koznitzer, and he'd talk about the Choz of Lublin, and he has one story about, 2 stories actually, but I'm going to share one with you, about the Piaseczno Rebbe, about the Aish Kodesh. It's called, if you want to look it up, The Holy Hunchback. Okay, and you'll see why it's called that. And I also want to point out that there's 2 versions, and all day I was oscillating, which one should I share tonight? When you say a story in 2 different places, 2 different stages, they come out a little differently. And each one is magical in different ways, right? So I chose this one, but when you look it up on YouTube tonight or beyond, you'll also find that more recently, I think 3 or 4 years ago, Aaron Razel, the great Israeli singer, turned this story into like a song narrative, which is also beautiful. Not as beautiful as this, but you could also find the other version. And here is, in closing, Rav Shlomo Carlebach's story about the Holy Hunchback that he met sweeping the streets of Tel Aviv.
But I want to tell you a story about Rav Kalonymus Kalman. Everybody knows that Rav Kalonymus Kalman had a kingdom of children. And his yeshiva, there were hundreds of young people, children between the age of 5 and 17, mostly. And he was like their father, their mother, their best friend. He did everything for them. In my whole life, I wanted so much to meet one of those people. Maybe somebody survived. And wherever I went, I asked people, I didn't find anyone. I knew just a few were left. Okay, now listen to me, Neshama and Adala, and I want you to remember the story.
So he's talking, remember Neshama and Ari. Those are Shlomo Carlebach's own 2 kids, Ari and Neshama. And even if he was in public, he would tell the stories to his children publicly. So throughout, he'll say Neshama and Ari.
Can you make it a touch louder, please?
One time, I walked down the Yarkon in Tel Aviv, and on a street corner, I see a street cleaner, a real hunchback, but really completely misfigured. And somehow my heart told me that maybe he's an Amadov Tzaddik, maybe he's one of the 36. I don't know who he is, but I better talk to him. I held out my hand and I said, "Hey, Shalom Lecha." And he answered back, "Alachem Shul." So I realized he must be from Poland somewhere. I said, "Where are you from?" He says, "I'm from Piaseczno."
Piaseczno is the proper pronunciation of Piaseczno. No one says it like that except for people who know.
He says, "What? You're from Piaseczno? I'm waiting to see people from Piaseczno all my life. Have you ever seen Rav Kalonymus Kalman?" He says, "What? Rav Kalonymus Kalman?" He says, I was in his yeshiva from the age of 5 till I was 11. And he says to me, believe me, when I was 11 and I came to Auschwitz, I was so strong that the Germans thought I'm already 17. And I was not a hunchback before. It's only because they beat me up so much and it never healed. So when I came out after the war, I was just, I'm a broken person. He said, I have nobody in the whole world. I turned away. I was just crying. I said to him, I have to ask the biggest favor in the world. Please tell me all about Shabbos and Piaseczno. And I was hoping I'd be able to give it over to Neshamal and Adala. He said, let me tell you something. Till Mashiach is coming.
Here's a brand.
Bad timing for an ad. I'll just let it go. 1 second.
Until Mashiach is coming, there'll never be such a Shabbos. There'll never be such a Shabbos again. Can you imagine hundreds of children and young people singing L'Chodai L'Legras Kala, Pnei Shabbos Mekabla? Hundreds of young people pouring out their hearts and singing Sholem Aleichem Malachi Sholem Malachi Sholem. So many holy angels with their eyes, do I have to tell you? But I want you to know, I can't tell you what it was, he says, but I just want you to know there'll never be such a Shabbos again. And I said to him, and he says, you know, the Rebbe ate with us Friday night. And, oh, it was so good, the simcha, the joy was. Again, he says, do you think this was paradise? It was much higher. It was much higher. So I said to him, my dear, sweetest friend, do you remember any of the teachings? Any Torah? Tell me some Torah from Rav Kalonymus Kalman. He says, you know something? After being in Auschwitz for so many years, you don't remember anything. But he says, you want to hear one Torah, he said, which saved my life. He says, I want you to know between the fish and the soup, and the soup and the chicken, between the chicken and the dessert, Rav Kalonymus Kalman would say Torah. But after every Torah, he would say like this, Kinderlach, children, Gedenke, remember, die größte Sache in der Welt ist, 10 Jahre Taiva. The greatest thing in the world is to do somebody else a favor. And he would say it all the time, every Friday night. Maybe every Friday must have said it 5-6 times. He says, when I came to Auschwitz, and I knew that my whole family is killed, I wanted to kill somebody else or commit suicide. I just wanted to be violent. And there were moments when I couldn't bear it anymore. But suddenly I would hear my Rebbe's voice telling me, Kinderlach, gedenkt, die größte Sache in der Welt ist 10 Jahre Taiva. And suddenly there was so much life in my heart, and I knew what I have to do. I would get up wherever I was sleeping. And do you know how many favors you can do in Auschwitz at night? Do you know how many people want to tell you stories about their wives and their children, and nobody has strength to listen to it anymore? Because you heard it 1,000,000 times. I would be up all night going from one to the other, and they would tell me their stories. That'd keep me going for a few weeks. Then it was at the end again, and I just realized I have to commit suicide tonight. But in the last moment, I would hear my Rebbe's voice. Then he says to me, you know, I'm here in Tel Aviv. I have nobody in the whole world. I have nobody in the whole world. Do you know how often I walk down to the ocean and I'm already with my feet in the water? But in the last moment, I hear my Rebbe's voice. And you know what I'm doing? I'm running back to the streets. He says, do you know how many favors you can do to people on the streets of Tel Aviv, even if you're a street cleaner? Okay, now listen to me, Neshama and Adala, my most beautiful children. A few months later, I came back, and I was looking for my holy hunchback. He wasn't there. I asked the people, where's the street cleaner? It's the street cleaner. Don't you know he passed away on Sukkot? So you know what I'm waiting for? Shem Nidala? I'm waiting for Mashiach to come.
That's the story of the Holy Hunchback. You know, his for us to say that his neshama Shavan Aliyah, I think, is inappropriate. People who even if not the Piaseczno Rebbe, people who live through what he did are elevated beyond what we could imagine always. But Hashem should avenge his death and the death of the 6 million, and the week of Yom HaShoah. If we want to internalize the message of what he lived with, just remember Tyra Kindle, that the best thing you could do is to do someone else a favor, and that's what vivified and animated his students. And I think we have to appreciate that's what vivified and animated him through unwilling to be ushered out of the darkness and being treated like the royalty that he was. But he realized in the moment in history that he realized that he was able to do lots of favors for the Jewish people, and those favors are favors that we're still gaining from a tremendous amount even today. So this week, let's do lots of favors for lots of people.